Welcome to the webinar, Toxic Employees. My name is Amy Mohammed, and I'm the Director of Learning and HR Compliance for the Michigan Chamber of Commerce. We're really excited today to be able to bring you a webinar on such a hot topic right now within organizations. We're also very honored to be able to partner with Professor Amy Keeley. Amy's going to speak a little bit more about her background in a couple of minutes. However, I do want to mention that she has been a workforce management industry expert for 30 years, and she currently owns her own consulting firm. We're going to keep questions and answers until the end, but we encourage you as we go through this webinar to jot down your thoughts so that we can have a nice, robust dialogue at the end. One additional thing I would like to add is that on the last slide, you will see Amy's information on how to contact her, and she welcomes you doing so directly. We look forward to this webinar, and we hope that you enjoy it as well. With that, I would like to hand it over to Professor Amy Keeley.
Well, thank you, Amy, and thank you for the Chamber for allowing me to be here again and talking about some very interesting topics that are very critical, especially since the market conditions are the way they are. So today is about toxic employees and re-engineering thinking and management practices for dealing with challenging employees. And I want to just echo that I am an interdisciplinarian, which means that I'm interested in a lot of different disciplines, such as business, marketing, generational workforce management, and health advocacy, as well as philosophy. And I know these are all wildly different discipline areas, but what they do is they allow me to have a different lens with which to look at things and bring a unique perspective to problems and solutions. And I've done that today on the idea of toxic employees. And the reason why is because I've managed toxic employees, and I have been a toxified employee where I didn't start out that way in a company. And there were situations that changed my behaviors to where I realized, because I'm a marketer and I do market research as well, and had noticed that my behavior, I was aware of my behavior changing and not liking how I had changed, and really kind of taking a look at what were some of the conditions that altered my personality. And I'll talk about those today as well. But for the agenda today, I really wanted to discuss debunking the traditional or more of a reactive method of managing toxic employees. Resolving the toxic employee situation becomes necessary because of the things that we're going through today, and I'll discuss that. Listening to toxic employees as part of a thorough investigation to understand what are driving their behaviors. And we'll talk about why actually, how you listen. And then also reverse engineering how to view and use toxic employees. So take everything that we've talked about and then use it as a plan for how to move forward with toxic employees. And then a recap of the key points to make sure that, there's an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. So when you're thinking about debunking the traditional reactive methods, what I decided to do was to go out and look at what the industry says about toxic employees and look at some of the experts that are out there that are driving the conversation about how to identify and manage toxic employees. So here, the first point I wanted to make is if you look at some of these that I pulled off of online when I was looking at things, is there's a negative tone about toxic employees and negative imagery that's out there. And these experts have solutions that are really that they're truly biased. And you can't be biased, especially in today's marketplace. But like the first one, for example, toxic employees and how to avoid them. I get it that you want to try to avoid them, but that's more aligning yourself in the recruitment marketing process, which is what I do on the marketing side, having worked in the staffing industry, is that's more cultural alignment. Making sure that the people that you're hiring fit within your organization's culture and that they've got the skill sets necessary to be able to perform the function. That's not looking at saying, hey, I'm going to make sure I don't hire toxic employees, because what I have found is that most toxic employees are not inherited. They don't come to your company as toxic employees. They become toxic employees. They're created as toxic employees. So this image that, look at the one that looks very, almost Satanist type pictures that they're almost demonic. It's creating a negative tone. And yet we have to really understand the circumstances of why people become toxified and how do you reverse that and make it productive. So again, many experts out there are blaming the employee. They begin by describing the type of toxicity that's out there, which is not bad because obviously you want to be able to identify it. But I think everybody pretty much knows the toxic negative environment when an employee is becoming disruptive in the workplace, and how to best to manage their negative behaviors until they can be fired by HR. And while that may there's this narrative out there that, oh, well, we try to work with the employee. More often than not, because of the approaches that are taken, they're always going to end up terminating an employee because they see it as too much an investment to try to turn the employee around, or they just aren't going to fit. So I pulled some quotes from experts so that we can look at them and see. So the first one was by somebody at the Kellogg School of Management. And why this becomes important to me is these are the people who are in schools teaching the next generation how to be able to handle toxic employees. And I'll say too, as I go through these slides, make sure that you um, are taking notes because I don't really read everything that's on the slide, or I may discuss things that are not on the slides. And also just from as a reminder that, these videos will be available through the chamber so that you can always go back and watch the video. And I think there's a PDF of my presentation that will go out. So if I don't cover something specifically, you can go back and read it yourself. And then also you have that opportunity to take notes or go back and listen to the video and be able to take it. But here the quote is, there's a difference between a difficult employee and a toxic one. And that I agree with. Um, and it says, I call them toxic because not only can they cause harm, but they can also spread their behaviors to others. They're making it sound like this person has a disease. And I get it that negativity can rub off on people. But again, as we go through this, you're going to see that I take a different approach where I look at it like, could it be spread to others? Yes, but it can also be managed and it can also be caused by others. So we'll dissect that as well. But I just wanted you to start to see some of the really kind of inherently biased perspectives that are out there, that these people are, diseased or, problematic, and toxic, and to avoid them. And that's not always the case. Here's a professor from Georgetown. There's a pattern of de-energizing, frustrating, or putting down teammates. Well, sometimes again, it's the teammates that are causing the issue and not necessarily the employee, but you won't know that till the investigation. Like here it says, it's not just that Joe is rude, the whole team suffers because of it. Of course, your first step as a manager should be to avoid hiring toxic people. We talked about that earlier. But once they are on your team, it can be hard to get rid of them. So they're already starting to thinking about like the eviction process when you can't evict somebody out of a house that landlords figure out. So they're already thinking, oh, hey, they're hard to get rid of. Well, in some cases, yes, because they're not necessarily, it's the environment that they're in. So we'll talk about that as well. And it's oftentimes the behavior doesn't run against anything legal. So you can't fire them if others in the organization don't agree that a line has been crossed. So again, here's somebody who's teaching as a professor telling you that just because they haven't done something legally wrong, that it's more difficult to fire them unless there's a collective agreement that the person needs to go. So again, these are what some of the things that experts are saying. So one of the things that the experts had done is they had come up with this recommendation. So the first one was dig deeper. And so the process that I was thinking is that they recommend digging deeper, but not to understand really the root cause as an investigator, because they do go in with the bias and they go in building a case against somebody, and then recommending counseling if that's necessary, as if it's the employee's problem. And looking at that person as they're at fault, they need to fix it or they need to go. And I'll tell you, like, we'll talk about that later. This one is give them direct feedback and explain the consequences. With this information, it's more like tough love approach. And again, assuming that it's solely the toxic employee's fault, is that either you figure out how to fix it or you're gone. When, again, there might be circumstances surrounding it that explain it. Except that someone won't change. Well, that's true. Some people don't change, but that's also not just the employee that won't change. That can be the boss or the coworkers that are causing the problem, that are creating the behavior that won't change. And so it's not always just the employee's fault that they won't change. And then separate the toxic person from other teammates. I mean, when I read this, my first thought is like, okay, so isolating somebody is not better. That's like putting them in solitary confinement. And if we've learned nothing from the jails, process of wrong, and which I know is a little extreme to say jails and toxic employees, but you put people in jail away from society and then have them come out thinking that they're going to be rehabilitated and not do it again. The same principle works for employees. You don't segregate them unless there's certain circumstances, and we'll talk about that later, when you would separate somebody, but you have to do it delicately so that they don't feel alienated, because then you're just making the toxic behavior even worse. So the next step is like resolving the toxic employee situation is necessary. And why is that necessary? It's called the vanishing workforce. And this is one of the areas that I'm writing articles and I'm talking about, because it does include generational workforce issued, but also COVID exhaustion. They also call it the Great Resignation. And so now you have to really think about it, because those employees that you fire, you may not be able to hire a backup. It may take you months, years, or you may not ever find someone to replace them. So it's now more important than ever to really think about how to be able to keep these employees and rehabilitate them. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what this means in the vanishing workforce. So while I may not go through all of these on here, again, everything will be available to you, but I will give you the key takeaway points. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and this is from 2013 report. So in 2013, they were already predicting that by 2022, there was going to be an impact to the labor force, because the boomer generation is the largest generation. I'm Gen X, and so we are the smaller generation. The millennials are the next larger generation, but the Zoomer generation, which is Gen Z coming up behind them, they are going to actually be the larger workforce that's out there. So they already knew that retirements were going to impact the workforce this year. So we already knew it was coming. And yet many people were not prepared for it. Then they're entering the labor force. And I want to start to make this distinction. Entering the labor force does not mean that they are going to work for corporations. That just means that they're 18 years old and they can go work anywhere. And what I really want to emphasize is that there's a difference between entering the labor force, let's say going to work in academics, becoming a school teacher, going to work in government. That's different. You're not in the supply chain. You're not creating a product or a service that somebody will buy. You're not on an assembly line. So there's a difference between entering the workforce. So to me, and again, I'll tell you, that's my unique lens of looking at it and saying that this is, I'll make this distinction later. And that there's always, almost always have been a 60% turnover rate, which is an astronomically high rate. And it's a catastrophic failure that companies can't keep employees. And while they've had the luxury in the past several years of having a labor force that has been robust enough that they can keep churning and burning through employees, that is not the case now. And so they're going to, you have to start to make some very difficult decisions. So again, looking at that 60%, the average US rate of turnover among businesses remains at 57.3%, which is almost 60%. So again, that was in 2013. So now you've got a turnover rate that's even higher, and we'll talk about that as well. So here, this is the 2022 report. So again, I do go out to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I do realize that. But we have this vanishing workforce. So it was already vanishing pre-COVID. And the COVID stress increased the quickness of it. So now you have retirees that are saying, hey, listen, I'm just exhausted mentally. I'm now at risk for being around people. I could die because of it. I'm out of here. But the most telling thing here is it says, using a global survey of 4,000 companies and more than 9 million employees' records, found that the resignations were mid-career employees. And more importantly, it was between the ages of 30 and 45. The millennial generation tops out at around 48 years old. So these aren't millennials, or these aren't Gen Xers that are leaving. They're not boomers that are leaving. These are older millennials. And that's huge, because now you have them exiting. So now you had this workforce that you kind of knew was going to go, which was the boomers. But now you've got boomers, Gen Xers, and some of the millennial class that are now leaving. So, you had, and that I think a lot has to do with COVID and that generation just not being able to handle the stress level. So again, I'm trying to make that case that it's very delicate balance out there, and these the resources that you may have had if you let somebody go are not out there for you anymore. And so looking at what's not considered, and this is where I'm also writing another paper. Again, I'm into a lot of different interest areas, but what's not being considered by that study is that there's almost 70% of all the 33 million businesses in the US are small businesses, and about 70% of those are one owner businesses. And so when you're looking at the businesses that are out there, these are people who have not worked in government. I mean, have not worked in business before. So let's take a look at that. So in the past, government, education, media, and healthcare have always operated as a nonprofit, but have grown to shift to the workforce. So what has happened is that basically, if you go work for the government, again, as I said before, you are not entering the workforce. And they operated as a nonprofit, but now they're operating as for-profit companies, which means that these people are going to work as history majors or environmental scientists. They're not going to work in corporate. So now that worker pool of people that will go work in the industry is not there anymore. And then you have less modern college educated grads actually wanting to work in the workforce because they heard from their parents, oh, go to college and you'll get a good job when you come out. And that was true for their parents because at the time there was scarcity, which means that not everybody had a college degree or not everybody had had gone that far. So now it's required that you even almost have a master's degree to be able to come out of college and go straight into a management position. And they're not interested in low level or entry level positions because they've been told that they're worth more and that they can start out. So when they get into corporate and someone offers them a lower level or entry level job, they don't want to take it. So they won't. And then you have Gen Y and Gen Zs, which this is why I'm also, again, writing an article on this from my education perspective, is that they're not grooming people anymore to go work in corporate. And corporate hasn't figured that out yet. What they've done in acting like a for-profit company, they have figured out that corporations are not their consumers. They don't pay their bills. Students pay their bills. So if students have said, I don't want to work in corporate because my parents come home every night and are like, oh my goodness, I'm so tired and I don't want to work and I hate my boss and whatever, and they can see the toxicity in it, why would they want to go work there? So schools have now developed entrepreneur programs, and these students are not entering the workforce at all. So now that 60% turnover rate, you used to have a robust pool of people that you could fill. And now between the COVID stress and people that are not even entering the industry supply chain workforce, you have a very, very limited pool. And that's really at the heart of what the vanishing workforce is. So let's now talk about what is about listening. And because listening is critical to toxic employees as part of this thorough investigation that you need to have to understand not the behaviors. Because again, with toxic employees, it's easy to understand what the behavior is, but what's driving their behavior. And that can be toxic workplace environments, bad bosses, or even health conditions that will break down how that works. So again, going back to that Harvard Business Review, they talk about what to do. And these are from the experts. So they'll say, talk to the person to try to understand what's causing their behavior, or give concrete, specific feedback that offer an opportunity to change, almost like a threat, either you change or you're out. And then look for ways to minimize the interactions between the toxic employee and the rest of your team. Again, I've reinforced this is what they're saying is the feedback. Part of the problem is that this first step of the investigation often occurs with a bias. You already look at the toxic employee as if it's their fault. Like fix it and make it better. And if you're in the middle of a toxic environment that's causing these behaviors, it's something that you can't change. And what you're finding is that people are leaving. That's where that 60% turnover rate. Those are just toxic employees that have figured out how to work in the system, but they hate their job every day and they will leave. They just haven't gotten to the point where they've let their behaviors come out at work, or maybe they have, but they're leaving. And again, if you're going to manage this new environment that people don't understand that, corporations have lost control of their workforce. And if the CEO of Starbucks is out begging people to come to work, you know that you have lost control of your workforce. So you have to make them want to work. If you look at the don'ts, they say that you don't bring the situation up with other team members. Allow them to mention it first and provide suggestions. Don't try to fire the person. Document the behavior, its impact, and your response. So again, they didn't say fire you, but they said start documenting the behavior. That is building a case for someone to fire them. So they don't, again, approach it like I'm going to rehabilitate somebody. It's don't fire them yet, build a really strong case, and then go ahead and fire them. And then avoid getting wrapped up into handling the issue because you'll ignore more important matters. Well, what's more important than trying to save your employee base? So I agree it can't take away from everything else and be, exclusively what you're working on, but they are equally as important of trying to turn around an employee. So again, I think there's a balance that needs to happen there. So I wanted to pull a quote from Ernest Hemingway. It says, I like to listen. I have learned a great deal from listening carefully. Most people never listen. And that's why even in writers can write great things because they're looking at people's behaviors. So one of the things I also wanted to highlight is that in the 1600s, it was noticed that our body motions or gestures often disclose the state of mind. And that's from Francis Bacon discussing what we now know is nonverbal behavior. And I'm a salesperson and I'm a marketer. And I will tell you whether it's in a focus group or whether it's my prospect that I'm sitting across from. I am watching their nonverbal behavior communication more than I'm even listening to what's coming out of their mouth, because it is very telling when you start to really look at people's nonverbal behavior. So let's look at what is nonverbal behavior. So vocals, your tone, it's called a paralanguage, the way you speak. Again, tone of your voice. If you approach a negative, a toxic employee as if you're reprimanding them as a child, then they're going to become more toxified because now you've insulted them. So making sure your tone of voice is appropriate, your proximity, how close you sit or stand to someone, is a form of nonverbal communication. If you're talking to a toxified employee and you're too close and that makes them offended, or if they get too close to you, because these nonverbal communication also work on you as well. It's not just what they're saying with their nonverbal communication, it's what you are saying with your nonverbal communication. So proximity is a concern. Gesturing, like what I'm doing right now, moving your body movements, gesturing and nodding with your hands, or nodding your head and nodding with your head and gesturing with your hands are a way to be able to show empathy. If you make eye contact and you're nodding with somebody, that means something. So again, that's a great way for you to convey, yes, I'm understanding what you're saying. Yes, I'm listening to you and I'm acknowledging what you're saying. It's eye contact, and that's gesturing. Touch. This gets dicey in the HR world, I know, but a hug conveys warmth or love, and a pat on the back is a job well done. But if it's unsolicited and unwelcome, it can cause a person to become uncomfortable. There's also cultural differences and appropriateness of touch. So it's a dicey one, but again, think about it. If you have a good relationship with somebody, when you give somebody a hug, if you hear that their parent has died or whatever, like my mother passed away while I was working, it's one of the reasons that my boss wasn't listening to how much I was struggling, and I was working 40 hours a week, or more than 40 hours a week. It was difficult. And touch does convey, like a pat on the back, nice job, Amy. Or when my mom passed away and people give you hugs of condolences, those are all gestures of nonverbal communication. There's also physiological changes that are linked to discomfort. So people blushing because they're or sweating, or their eyes tearing up. Those are all ways to be able to say, if I'm looking at somebody and they're tearing up, then I now immediately know what has caused it, because I am present in the conversation. I brought something up, they teared up. I know what's causing the behavior. There's something here in this wording that I used, or the situation that I described, that the person is reacting to emotionally. And then there's attentiveness. Again, I said it before, eye contact. I will turn my phone over, take them into meetings, I turn it over. For me, eye contact is huge. It's saying, I care about you. And in this world of, where we're struggling with interpersonal skills because we're too busy with taking somebody who's walking by, oh, hey, I just had to tell them something, or I'm answering something on my phone. No, people need your attention. They need your empathy. They need your understanding. And you can only get that in a one-on-one conversation when you're looking somebody in the eye, not only in sales, but also with toxic employees who you're trying to re-engage back again. So why it's important and why I figured it out a long time ago, and probably why I'm really good in sales and what I do, is that nonverbal communication is 65% of what you say to somebody is your nonverbal behavior. 35% is your verbal behavior. So now you see why it's really important, especially with toxified employees, that you start to look at your own nonverbal communication and what you're saying to them, and also what they're saying back to you that they may not be telling you with their mouth. The other one too that I look to is what they're telling you when they cross their arms. But most people don't realize that when you cross your arms, you're covering your center body mass. Your heart, your lungs, all your major organs are right there in front of you. And it's a defensive protective measure that we now use in conversation with people, but it's still an instinctive response to protect yourself. So like when I'm talking to some of the employees that I've had that have become toxified, and they do that, I'm instantly aware, and I'm trying to find ways to diffuse the situation to see if I can get their arms to go down and to get them calmer again, or I'm aware of what I was talking about when they crossed their arms. So there's things like that. So again, you're going to use various verbal and nonverbal communication techniques and situational strategy that can help you de-escalate and effectively handle difficult people, uncover secrets to moving difficult conversations forward. There's a model for conversations about difficult attitudes and employees, and I'll discuss that later. And then know how to act and not react, because if you're reacting, you're not in control. And you're not in control of your nonverbal communication just as much as you're not in control of your verbal communication. So it involves, lead with more confidence, feeling less stressed, gaining more success in working and interacting with your team so that you can handle these situations and pull yourself back into a neutral position when, let's say, somebody's doing a behavior that is driving you nuts. How do you pull yourself back and have that self-talk in your head going, okay, wait a minute. I know that they're having these issues. I see it all the time. Something's going on. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm not going to react. That becomes key. Next, we're going to talk about reverse engineering. So now I've talked about all these different things. So how do you put these in practice to really look at reverse engineering how you think about toxic employees and how you use them? And again, I worked for Kelly Services, and they had adopted their own program, which is part of the Malcolm Baldrige quality management system, ISO and Six Sigma. And while I think on some levels they went a little too far in their quality management, I sucked it in because I never look at criticism the same. I look at it like feedback. I can't ever get better unless people give me feedback about myself. And the same thing happens with employees as well. So there's a very unique opportunity to be able to turn a negative employee, not just to change them and get their engagement to be positive for what they're doing, but also for your company. So smart leaders see it as an opportunity to see that the toxic behaviors that employees exhibit and use them as a continuous improvement opportunity to better understand their organization, including workplace dynamics, problems with processes, or functional operation problems. Meaning that if somebody's reacting, let's say a process is broken and it's causing them more time, instead of saying, oh, you're a toxic employee, find out what it is. And they may say, well, I hate it when I have to do this because it takes so much time and it just drives me crazy. And I can't get all my other work done and I have to work over late at night. That's telling you that there's an opportunity to go look into those processes and make it more efficient for them to be able to work in it. And that process efficiency may actually lead to more profitability in your company. So again, if you really start to think about and you reverse engineer what you're thinking, a toxic employee is an opportunity for your company to actually grow and change in the right proper way because you're listening to them in a different way. So there's actually a lot more opportunity because most people are upset with things that are happening at work. So again, learning to ask better questions is the key. And it's using the Socratic method that I've learned in my philosophy program or just in the legal system is consider the toxic employee's toxicity as that point of origin. So, like for me, I got hired and got rave reviews in my first year that I was there. Got 10, got a huge bonus and a tenured merit increase, and then something changed, and my whole demeanor changed. And yet nobody asked me what was going on. I was trying to tell them as best I could, but I was overwhelmed. But no one went back and said, well, wait a minute, let's go back and look at the point of origin for when Amy's behavior changed. And then develop these questions. I mean, sit back and develop the questions designed to learn about a person's personal world and what might be impacting it there, and their professional issues that are driving the negative behaviors. Because yes, they can all become legal liabilities if you don't do it properly. And again, if you do it the right way, not only are you avoiding the legal liabilities, but you're continuously improving your company. So looking at the type of questions that you should be asking, does the toxic behavior create a physically unsafe work condition? Is there a point in time where the employee's behavior changed? Is the toxic behavior directed at you or other workers? Is the operation of the company maybe behind the behaviors? Could there be a medical reason causing the toxic behavior? So we're going to go through each one of these. And then also, are you and others playing a role in escalating these behaviors? So looking at the first is that obviously there's a difference between dangerous situations and employees that are disruptive, difficult, challenging, and toxic that way. So obviously, dangerous situations need to be handled differently. Seek legal advice from your legal teams or your lawyers on how to be able to have any conversation about rehabilitating or terminating somebody. Someone may have done something that is in the employee handbook that can be immediately terminated for cause. So, you should talk to legal advice to get them. Also, make sure that you're in a neutral place. You don't want that person to escalate around other employees and maybe make it unsafe for them as well. So take those conversations, not that you're isolating them. This is where you're just taking them to a different place in the building, out to lunch, someplace that's neutral where you can have a conversation, and then do your homework. And talk to the offended party and maybe different people within your organization to create that 365 feedback loop before you actually have conversation, and then carefully frame your inquiry to discover the truth, because there may be also office politics involved that are driving these conditions as well. So you really want to go to these conversations with really having as many facts as that you can. Obviously have an HR representative in the room for the discussion. And that person not is just the safety net for the company, but also, you want to make sure that there's witnesses there to make sure that what's said is said and documented, and there's a witness. But also when you bring the same gender employee, again, this is where I think differently. It's not that, yes, you're covering yourself because you have a man who, let's say, is having a conversation with a woman. And it's a difficult conversation and you want to have a female, let's say from HR there, but because sometimes a woman will understand another woman much better or helps them become more comfortable in their conversation. So don't look at your same gender person in the room as just, hey, I'm covering my bases for legal purposes, but how can I use this person to de-escalate or make this person feel more comfortable to share more information with me? So when I talked about where there's a time and a point of origin, as I mentioned my own, is look at the hire date and look at when that person's employee that their behaviors begin to change. And then you can start to ask, well, was it a personal issue that happened at that point? Or is it a professional issue? Did they get more work on their workload? Did their mother enter a nursing home at that point? Because that's where your investigations are really trying to get to this point to determine where is the root cause of the behavior issue that's going on. The next one is that toxic behavior directed at you or at coworkers? So it's important to realize that people will target you or others when they don't like someone or when the stress is too great. In my case, for example, I became toxified because the stress was too great. I remember working one day, 4 days in a row with an hour's sleep every night. It was overwhelming. So the truth is not always what it seems. And that's where your role as the investigator is really to get to the truth of what's causing it, not, again, assuming that it's all the employee's fault. So it's important to collect information before developing a solution. If the toxicity is between two coworkers, then treat the situation like a therapy discussion and set rules of engagement between the parties to then broker a positive resolution between the two of them. And let me give you an example on that case study. I'm from Michigan, obviously. I went and lived in South Carolina when I worked for Comcast, and they were rebuilding. They were building a new building, and I had to be put in with the little Southern Bell administrative person. And here I'm on the phone, I'm launching digital cable, and it wasn't working well. And it was things like I was on the phone. I remember saying things like, well, I don't know why the remote doesn't work, but you need to fix it because I'm launching in 6 months and I can't launch with a remote that doesn't work. So why don't you call me back when you figure it out? But it needs to be done in less than a month. And I would hang up. And next thing I know, like about a month later, there's all these rumors being spread around about me. You can feel the tension in the air in the building. And my boss was like, enough of this. Cause I was like, go put me in a closet somewhere. I don't care. I just don't want to work with her in that room anymore. I just got too much business to do. And she's like, no, we're going to talk about this. So she brings us together, and I start out by saying, I don't know what this is, but I'm just doing my job and blah, 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 blah. And when it got to Angela, um, this employee, she was very quiet. And then it basically was told to her, either you say whatever you say or you hold your peace and you change your behaviors. And she was like, I just don't like her. The way she talks to people is so disrespectful. And both my boss were from, we were from the north, and we were like, holy smokes. And what she didn't like was my directness. And I learned that down there, for example, if I wanted something, I would go, hi, Miss Pat, how's your mother? How's your brother? By the way, did you get your rose bushes planted? By the way, can I have that report that I asked you about yesterday? So it was more about the relationship that you have, and then you talk about business. Up here in the north, it's, hey, Pat, you got that report I need? And by the way, did you get your rose bushes planted? How's your mom? How's your dad? So it's backwards. And that communication style is a cultural difference and dialect difference that created a toxic situation in the company. So there's a mini case study I'm using myself as a case study for how, it can happen with cultural issues. And then, is the operation of the company, may it be by that maybe it causing the behavior. So looking at the environment is one that pits workers against each other. I work for companies that try to create an unhealthy competition between people, where you're pitting people against each other. Well, of course you're going to end up with a toxic environment. So competition is something that's very, very delicate balance. But in that case, you have to determine the toxic worker if it's a systemic problem and this is an ongoing problem, or is this a specific problem? If somebody's having a specific problem with one thing, that and you can resolve that one thing, that makes a difference. It's easily resolved. Systemic problems are going to be more complex. Is the toxic worker not the one exhibiting the toxic behavior? So maybe it's a coworker that's causing the behavior, and the person who's reacting is not even the person who's who's causing it. Or unrealistic expectations of the worker. Like I said, I had unbelievable. I mean, there was one time where I was doing RFPs, and I, we were using a technology tool, and I'm literally submitting these 30 seconds before the portal closes, and that's already stressful for many people. Can't handle that. Well, you add other things to my day, and it's going to make it a lot more challenging. And then is there a generational war, which I'll discuss later, because there is a generational war happening in your organizations, and you need to figure out how to address it. I know many companies come to me and ask me for help because they can't identify what's going on in their organization. And sometimes it takes a third party to be able to see which generation's causing what. So the other one is, are there medical reasons that are causing the behavior? Because, there are, like, I end up getting migraines, but it says that, sometimes your employees are medically reacting to workplace stress, toxic environments, extreme work hours, unreasonable demands, and they become unhealthy. And that's where Sir Richard Branson, who I love, who focuses on employees and said, happy employees make sure that your customers are happy. He created Virgin Pulse. And it's a wellness program designed to keep employees healthy, because there's many different reasons. If they take off less time for work because they're sick, then the time off they take can be because they are going on vacation, or they're working and they're healthy and they're not spreading germs. because again, there are people who are getting migraines, cancer, gut issues, immune diseases because of extreme stress. So a study by a management company, which is a staffing company, Robert Half, revealed that 90% of Americans will go to work sick. Well, think about it. If I'm at work sick and I'm not feeling well, then if something happens to me, I'm going to react the wrong way because I just don't have the energy to take it. And I'm working sick. So I may also have a situation that becomes blown out of proportion that now I'm angry about because when it happened to me, I wasn't feeling well. So again, being mindful that people being sick because of either work conditions or family conditions or whatever can impact their performance and become toxic. And then, are others playing a role in those bad behaviors? So I first want to look at bad bosses. So could you be a toxic boss and not realize it? In 2020, the American Psychological Association stated that in their study that 75% of Americans say their boss is the most stressful part of their day. And then there was another one by monster.com that says 76 of employees that they have recently had a boss that had some form of toxicity. So, those are pretty similar. So they're not very far off on their percentages to say that a lot of people struggle with their bosses and they will exhibit symptoms such as high blood pressure, or emotional symptoms such as depression. And I've had employees where the situation was so difficult that I tried to be a good boss by saying, okay, I'm going to create my office as a safe zone. So if you need to come here and close the door and say anything you need to say, if you need to cuss for like a good 2 minutes, then just please get it out of your system and just do whatever you need to do. And I also had to be mindful that it may have been directed toward me or it could have been directed towards a coworker, but I gave them a safe zone to be able to say freely whatever they wanted. Why? First of all, I'm not offended by that. But secondly, because otherwise I lose an employee. And I'll talk about it a little bit later about the cost of losing an employee. So if that's what it takes to calm their stress down and hear what they're saying and listen very carefully so that I can try to overcome it by having a conversation with them about, well, I know she did this. How can we remedy that to make sure that we create a process so that that doesn't happen again? That's how you kind of try to find ways to manage an employee's stress load because otherwise they become toxic. The next one is coworkers. Again, coworkers can really impact people. It can be a lot of issues with workers creating an unsatisfactory appearance. So often employees will appear to be satisfactory are actually those that are destroying the morale and attitude and performance of other employees. For example, let's say you have a meeting. Well, they go and get a group of people and have a meeting after a meeting where decisions are made or people are disparaged, that will get around, or the attitudes then rub off and that person feels it, or they act like they've already paid their dues or exploit social relationships with the boss, or it's not my job, or the gossip. All of those things can take someone who is working hard and toxify them. So again, it's not always the boss and it's not always that employee. It can sometimes be the coworkers that create the attitude. So I'll give you another little case study. When I bring this up, people always laugh at the graphic, but it's very true. It's like having 3 children in a family. So Gen Xers don't really like boomers. But we figured out how to be able to work with the boomer generation, but we really don't like them either. We've just cohabitated with them long enough to be able to learn how to work with them. But then if you look at the millennial generation, when they entered the workforce, then it was like 3 children. Boomers and Gen Xers usually formed alliances against millennials, or the millennials and the Gen Xers would form an alliance against the boomers. And what we've learned about Zoomers so far, because they're coming out there like right now, the age 7 to 23, if you look at the social media, they don't like millennials. So you can have a lot of this toxicity going on because it's a generational war inside your organization that you're not even aware of. And I've seen an organization I was working with recently where a boomer made a comment and the millennial rolled their eyes. A year later, I don't even think it was a year later, she decided to leave the company to go get her master's degree. So I'm sure if I saw that one instance of it happening, it was happening more often. So again, looking at that. So again, how do you take all this additional information and of re-engineering and add that to everything that we've talked about to create this reverse engineered of how to use the employees? So again, the first one is to do the situational analysis that I talked about. But looking at the self-reflection, Are you contributing to the workplace toxicity of the employee because of your management style? Or are expectations of hours and delivery times unreasonable? And then looking at the toxic work investigation is really trying to really be neutral, to really get to the root cause. And that root cause is it the employee, truly? Is it the coworkers that are causing it, or is it the boss that's causing it? And this is a very delicate role for HR, because HR has to try to be neutral. They're being paid for, their salaries are paid by the boss or by the company. But how do you go back to a boss sometimes and say, listen, the feedback coming in is that you're creating these really stressful situation, and that's what's the situation. Or, handling it, with the employee and trying to be diplomatic as well. So again, that investigation has to be neutral if you want to get to the root cause, because what's going to happen is if you don't get to the root cause, then you'll get rid of a toxic worker. You may or may not be able to hire a person who replaces them, and you're going to have that person become toxified as well because you never solve the root cause. And that's at the heart of continuous improvement. Obtaining all this feedback data so that you can get to the root cause, you can make the proper adjustments, and you can use it as a continuous improvement opportunity that can not only help the actual situation to get that employee re-engaged, but also may solve problems for the company as well by creating more profitability or increased efficiency. And then also the cost of termination. So we'll talk about this a little bit more, but there's a cost of, like they say, take 30% of a person's annual salary, and that's how much it's going to cost you to hire and replace them if they leave. And then there's the cost of training. Yes, there's the cost that everybody hears about of, oh, there's that first 40 hours of intensive training or on the job training, and may be costing, between, $1,200 and 40 hours of work week, but the actual cost is that it's $630 billion are what is the overall cost of employee turnover in the US. And think about it, that's at 60% of the workforce flipping. That's how much it's costing our industry for either product losses, things that don't go to market on time, customer service that becomes compromised because somebody leaves and the customer leaves a company. There's also, again, 33% of an employee's annual salary is the cost of replacing them that they've resigned. But again, in this vanishing workforce, you may not have somebody who can take their place. So engaging the toxic employee is absolutely critical. And that begins with creating stronger communication and giving them that space to be able to talk. And that comes with building trust. And trust is through eye contact. And it's also even asking, looking at their behaviors and are they symptomatic? If toxic behaviors stem from personal issues, a strong relationship will uncover that. So asking open-ended questions like, so tell me what's going on. What's going on with you? That's an open-ended question. It's a very human question to ask somebody. You will get an outpouring versus a closed-ended question where they're going to only answer it as yes or no. So it becomes important to really start to frame your questions as human questions, because people will tell you if they have a relationship with you. If they don't trust you, they're not going to tell you really what's going on. And so part of that is that, it's actually an internal marketing is where the team building happens. A lot of times companies leave it to HR to do the team building exercise, but it's actually an internal marketing function. But because marketers are best at selling, so we're not only good at selling to prospects to get new customers, but we're really good at selling employees as well, as selling them on the value of the company. So if you can't do it, bring in team building experts who can have team building exercises. When I was working for Comcast, we did a Myers-Briggs test, personality test, and we did the exercises with it. And they were so valuable and very interesting that I still remember them today. And I still have great relationships with people from my time at Comcast because of these team building exercises. So they're great ways to be able to engage workers. But I want to also take a moment to say that not only when you have the conversation with the employee, which we'll talk about in a second, but you need to be in the mindset, and you need to be very strategic about your mindset when you have them. So these are the 5 steps to prep for tough conversations with that worker. The first itself is to ask yourself 3 questions. The what happened conversation. Tell me what happened. I need to understand more from your perspective, and I'll go and ask the other person what happened, but what happened? And then also the feelings conversation. Understand that their feelings, they're toxic because they're angry, they're frustrated. Those are feelings, and feelings are not right or wrong. They're for your feelings. So you have to be able to start to think about, how am I going to have that feeling conversation with somebody to get out what's making them upset? And then the identity conversation. Identity can be a lot of things. It can be their ego and their identity in this conversation. It could be your ego and your identity in the conversation. It can also be the identity of the department, or the role in the company. So you want to really start to have this, what is your role and what do you feel, and be able to have that conversation about this person's identity, because that's also impacting what's going on. The second step is to check yourself. Check yourself and decide when to raise questions. Because just because you're in a meeting and you've got a list of questions that you want to ask, you don't always ask them. If somebody goes into a conversation, an explanation, and you realize that your next question is going to trigger them, then wait to have that conversation to ask that other question. So again, you got to be mindful of the situation and when it's appropriate to ask these questions, and then consider your approach. You always want to make sure that, again, going back to your body language, making sure that you're neutral in your perspective, which means you're open and you're not biased. You're not always thinking that it's the employee's fault, and that you're in a neutral location where you're not going to trigger them, or they get worried about being overheard by their coworkers, or somebody sees that person walk into your room, in your office. But make sure it's a neutral conversation with a neutral bias, that you're really listened. And if you're not there in that situation, then postpone the conversation. It's not good to force a conversation like that. The fourth is to explore the employee's story and yours, so that you both understand each other's perspective. If you're saying, hey, listen, I'm getting a lot of people who are calling me and I'm in HR, and I've got a lot of things on my plate to do. And yes, this is important, but how do we get this resolved? Because we all need to be doing our jobs and moving the company forward. And, there's that. And then also, if you're the boss, it's like, listen, I want to be a good boss to you, but I don't understand why these behaviors are coming, because I'm having to take more time away from my kids to work harder, because I spend all of my day trying to, broker between the fights of the coworkers. Whatever it is, you want to start to think about how you're going to frame your questions to be able to get the story out, because that also humanizes people. And then problem solving. You want to think about and go in, like I always go in with plan A through plan Z, is you want to come up with solutions that are achievable, that are going to work, but you want to make sure that you're prepared with many different solutions depending on what that employee may want. And then you'll figure out how to be able to get a commitment from them. But it goes in with thinking about all these different ways that you could correct the situation, and then working towards coming up with a solution with them. And then now we're in the conversation. So you've taken all this prep, and there's a 4-step model for engaging the toxic employee. This is the resolution approach. So this is the commitment model. Is step 1, describe the behavior with the employee. For example, and I gave you a practice on how this works. So step 1 is you want to describe the behavior. This is what's going on, and it's either taking the team down, or it's disrespectful to me, or whatever it is. Step 2, describe the impact. This makes me feel like you're challenging my authority, or this makes the team feel like this. And step 3 is to indicate the desired change. Really, I need to have a different way that we engage as a group. And if there's something that's wrong, then I would rather work through with you of changing processes, or whatever it takes to make it so that you're happy here in the workplace, that everybody can be happy. And then get the commitment. If I make this effort to find a new process, and we all agree that this process is what's going to work, are you going to make an effort to figure out how to make yourself not so angry and not have this behavior? So again, you want to do these before you immediately go start to build that case, and then also putting it in a performance plan. Now you can just create a commitment if you want to. It can be a verbal commitment, or you could put it in writing to say, I commit that if we fix this, then I will try to be less this. You can do that. And you can also go to the performance improvement plan. But most employees know that if you're being put on a PIP, you got basically 30 days, because the company is trying to build a case against you to leave. And again, this is not that day and age where you can do that anymore. So let's go ahead and recap the key points that I had discussed. Is don't immediately assume that the toxic employee is the problem, and instead consider yourself the investigator to uncover the truth and who it may be. It could be the boss, could be a coworker, and it could be the employee. It could be processes that are the problem. So again, figuring out where the truth lies. It actually could be a customer that's causing their toxic behavior. Go into the conversation with the idea of listening. Because if the employee is angry, it may be to hide, maybe a way to highlight continuous improvement opportunities. So looking at it from how can I improve my organization or how can I improve my department by actually listening to what's causing their frustration, it may actually cause me to find ways to improve the company because of listening to the anger this person has over something that's work related. If your investigation realizes that it is the toxic worker, then engage a neutral dialogue where you are listening and you're very conscious of verbal and nonverbal communication, including your own. And then following that 4-point commitment after you've done the prep model for clearly stating the behavior, the resolution, creating the contact to resolve the behavior, and then making sure it's mutually agreeable. Because again, this is not that day and age where you can not have employees engaged and be able to just terminate somebody and expect to have somebody back. And again, it's too costly to lose somebody in a company these days. And we need to start to realize that, for example, if somebody slams, their hand on the table, that's not necessarily a form of aggression. That's a gesture for frustration and being able to treat it as such. So these are the key points. And I just wanted to thank everybody again. And if you have any questions, we have 6 minutes left. So please feel free to ask any questions that you have. And thank you very much.